After the interview. The first task after the interview is to record all of your impressions that were not part of the dialogue recorded. These include observations of the interviewee, your own feelings and reactions, and any thoughts or insights that may have occurred in relation to the question. If you met in your interviewee's home, make notes about the setting. Jot down something to remind you of what the interviewee looked like. You may also note comments the interviewee made before the recording began or after it ended, because these are often highly significant. You can either speak all these impressions into your recorder or write them down. Do not let time pass before doing this, because these observations are fleeting and vanish from memory quite quickly. Transcription and analysis. The best process for doing narrative research is to regard interviewing, analyzing, and conceptualizing as part of a circle that you orbit in each instance. Willett, 2003. The interview may provoke new thoughts about your research question and lead you back to the scholarly literature to see whether others have commented on what you have noticed or learned from your interview. A preliminary analysis of the interview you have just conducted will make the next one better. I recommend transcribing the interview just after it was conducted. This makes it easier to review the interview and conduct an initial thematic analysis, or at least to reflect on what you have learned from the interview. I like to do my own transcription, as this puts me back in the interview moment, when I can pause and reflect on what I am hearing in a way that I couldn't do with the participant in front of me. But transcription is time-consuming, and you may prefer to hire someone else, who has signed appropriate confidentiality agreements, to do it. In such cases, you might listen to the recording along with the transcription, in part to check the transcription for accuracy, and in part to hear once again the participant's voice, as well as your own voice. It will certainly be important to transcribe verbatim all the words on the recording, as well as sounds that indicate feelings, laughs, guffaws, sobs. These include speech markers, I don't know, etc., that may reflect uncertainty or anxiety. You can also notate the tone of voice, e.g., she sounds happy, his voice is sad, she speaks hesitantly. Long pauses should also be indicated. Beyond this, the exactitude of transcription depends on what you intend to do with the data. I tell my students that if they don't intend to analyze the exact length of pauses, there is no need to time them. Many researchers who do discourse analysis have created complex and exacting transcription conventions, which may be used for analyzing the language and speech patterns of the interview. Willig, 2003, Potter and Wetherell, 1987. For other purposes that focus on meanings, you will have to transcribe with the aim of capturing the words used and meanings intended by the speaker. The hesitancies and uncertainties in speech that you may have noticed in the transcriptions in this book are markers of the speaker's internal states. Indeed, Carol Gilligan made a very important discovery about adolescent girls' development by paying close attention to the use of "I don't know" by her teenage interviewees, Gilligan and Brown, 1992. The move from the live interview to audio tape to text progressively changes and devitalizes the interaction. Transcription, then, should try to preserve the original context as much as possible and try to capture something of the relationship in which the interview evolved. This can be done with marginal notes or commentary, and the transcription should somewhere include the notes you recorded at the conclusion of the interview. As you listen to the interview, pay attention to yourself as an interviewer, and think about what effect you were having on the participant. You can use this time of listening as self-supervision about your interviewing stance, and think about other ways you might have better intervened, or not intervened. At the same time, or on a second review or a review of the transcript, begin to note important themes or understandings that are emerging in relation to the question you are exploring. This will indicate what aspects of the experience you want to learn more about in the next interview. Did you get detailed enough stories? If not, you can remedy this with the next participant. One dilemma of narrative research is how to interpret absent material. Often we expect participants to develop certain themes, perhaps ones our theories suggest are salient, and we simply don't hear about them. Later interviews give us opportunities to ask about these areas more directly, in order both to enlighten ourselves and to clarify why they may have been omitted in the earlier interviews. In a dissertation study by one of my students, the research question concerned the impact of failed love in late adolescence on adult development. To explore this issue, the student interviewed volunteers who had had a failed love experience that still affected them. He obtained rich descriptions of the love relationships in each participant's life, but after 8 interviews, what was consistently missing was detailed discussion of sexuality. There were passion and romance, but no sex. What was he to make of this? In later interviews, he asked participants directly about the meanings of sexuality in the context of these love relationships, and was therefore able to write a more thorough and conceptually meaningful analysis. The research relationship after the interview. It has become popular in some research groups to do what is called member checking, which involves asking the participants to go over transcripts of their interviews to comment on accuracy or even to review the researcher's interpretations. Lincoln and Guba, 1985. I don't do this or advise doing this unless there is some very clear purpose for doing so. Here is my reasoning. A participant cannot comment on the accuracy of the transcription. That can be verified only when the researcher listens to the recording along with the transcript. The researcher will only be interested in the accuracy of the report if the participant is construed as a witness to some outside event and if what is important to the researcher is getting the facts right. If what are of interest to the researcher are personal accounts and meanings, then the interview represents just one such construction. The report that the researcher creates from the interview will represent a truth rather than the truth, and the researcher will assume interpretive authority for his or her understanding of the meanings of the interview material. Josselson, 2011, Chase, 1996. Where the researcher aims to discover something new, he or she may well see something that the participant does not see. In such cases, what does disagreement from the participant who has been checked with mean? Asking the participant to comment on an interpretation will produce other truths, and if these are of interest to the researcher, then reading the transcript can be a basis for a second interview that will enlarge the understandings from the first. Most participants, however, do not want to be bothered with this. They have given the interview and have now returned to their lives. The researcher, however, far from being finished with it, is just embarking on hours of review. Asking participants to review the transcripts usually leads to long delays, because they are not interested in the minutiae of the research study. All they have agreed to do is to share their experience. Of course, in collaborative action research projects, this may not be true, and a different sort of research relationship may be established. This may mean more involvement of participants in the creation of the research report. And if a researcher's aim is simply to give voice by representing the experience of the participants, then he or she may well want to check for accuracy. Researchers' motivations for involving participants in the analysis phase of the research project often stem from the inherent discomfort of the epistemological basis for narrative research. In a hermeneutic approach, all meanings are relative, and there is no right answer. The researcher takes interpretive authority, Chase, 1996, for the work. This means that the interpretations of the material are products of the researcher, who will take care in the report to document the conceptualization and to anchor it in the narrative material selected to create the argument the researcher wishes to make. The participant has no privileged point of view. The analysis is of the interview material, not of the participant. Josselson, 2011. In the project I worked on with colleagues in which we each analyzed a single interview from our particular analytic viewpoints, Wirtz et al., 2011, we asked the participant, who was a graduate student in psychology, to comment on our analyses. This led to layers of complexity. One such complexity was that the participant felt that the analysis that best represented her experience was the one done by the one of us she knew, who was actually her advisor. What we researchers agreed on was that her choice of analyses was not a reflection of who had gotten it right. That she disputed certain interpretations some of us made did not make them incorrect. People have defenses and ways of seeing themselves that color their interpretations of the transcripts of their own interviews. We researchers, however, were not right either. Rather, we offered ways of viewing the narrative material that might be useful in further conceptualizing the research question. These dilemmas are fully explored in Wirtz et al., 2011, and Josselson, 2011. For the current purposes, suffice it to say that asking for participants' input does not solve the problem of locating truth and creates other problems. The task of researchers in the analysis phase of the study is to document their own interpretive process and understanding in light of both the interview material and the conceptual framework they aim to apply or extend. In most cases, the participant is not much interested in what the researcher does with the interview material. The interview itself, with its opportunity to talk at length, self-reflectively, with an interested listener, is reward enough. Participants are not scholars, most of them are not, anyway, and don't care about the conceptualizations that will be addressed to scholars. They are interested in the researcher's gratitude for their help with the project, but they usually do not want to be burdened with other requests. If the researcher has promised the participant a copy of the final report, or if the participants are likely to read it on their own, then the research relationship continues, but often in ways that the researcher will not know about. This raises the problem that even well-camouflaged material may still be recognizable to the persons whose stories appear in the report. Although in each interview the researcher has refrained from commenting on or interpreting the participant's experience from outside the framework in which it was offered, the research report does just this. The empathic listener has now moved out of the stance of understanding from within the participant to talking about the participant to others. There is inevitably some betrayal in doing this, a betrayal softened perhaps by the fact that the written report usually appears long after the interview, so the feeling of closeness to the interviewer has lessened and the memory of what was said has faded. Still, participants reading a researcher's account of their experience may feel that their experience was distorted or misunderstood in some important ways. I think it important at the close of an interview to explain something about this phenomenon to the participant. I might say something like this. I am so grateful to you for sharing your experience. I'd like to tell you something about what I will do with this interview. I am going to analyze it along with a lot of other interviews and try to reach some more general understanding about the research topic. Then I will selectively make use of material from the interviews to write about what I think I have understood. So my focus won't be on writing about you or about this experience we've just shared, but about the research topic, and what sense I can make of it from what I've learned from you and the other people I've interviewed. If necessary, I can then always later remind people that I have tried to explain this. In my decades-long concern about what it does to people to be written about in narrative research, Josselson, 1996 c. 2007, 2011, I have not come across instances where people were actually harmed by participation. If identifying information is adequately disguised, then no one can identify the participants but themselves. One should write respectfully. But this doesn't mean that people won't take offense at something one has written if they recognize themselves. A participant in my longitudinal study who read a previous book I wrote about the women I have been following told me that when she read the book, she didn't like it that I said that she was needy, but she dismissed it and decided that I had gotten this wrong. After this later interview, I checked the book, and I had not said this in relation to her or any of the other women. But this didn't mean that my participant's experience of what she thought I had said about her was any less real to her. I have learned to bear the guilt of writing about people who have shared themselves with me. I hope that a higher good of scholarly understanding is served, and I have come to recognize, through interviewing people about the experience of being written about, that it does not harm them too painfully or irreparably. Sometimes it even makes them proud. Sometimes they think about themselves in a new and energizing way. In the end, though, our participants are usually more important to us than we are to them. We fade from their memories. But they are central to our work, and we spend hours with their interview texts. In fact, we often build our careers on what we learn from them. They stay with us throughout our lives. Chap 11. Conclusion. An in-depth interview is a special kind of conversation. The qualities of the research relationship you co-construct with your interviewees will determine the kind of sharing that will occur. Content is affected by the process. Interviewing in the ways I have detailed in this book will produce texts that reflect the nuanced complexities of life as lived by your participants. If you have listened carefully and intently, people will have told you their stories in an authentic way. If you have brought your humanity to the interviewing relationship, you will be rewarded with deeply felt accounts of experience. I recognize that this kind of interviewing is not for everyone. It requires a toleration of uncertainty and a willingness to grapple with the complexities of a relationship's unfolding. It also requires a capacity for containing the murkiness and messiness of human feel, and experience. It is not the only way to produce knowledge, and I respect other approaches. For some of you, perhaps reading this book has persuaded you that it is not for you. For those of you committed to this approach, I hope I have given you some pointers that will assist you along the way. Hope I have also communicated my own passion for this work and indicated the joys that ensue from encountering and learning about others in this way. The final challenge will be to return to the scholarly conversation and transform all that has enlightened you. All that has touched you. And all that you have learned into language and concepts that advance knowledge, however you think about knowledge. This relational form of interviewing will produce texts that are suitable for narrative analysis, phenomenological analysis, discourse analysis, and grounded theory, as well as for feminist approaches, social justice orientations, or just about any other approaches you may choose for analyzing the data. But that is a subject for another book.